This is Donna Paris from In the Black Canada, and you're logged on to Black Nova Scotia News, because there's always more to the story. My name is Donna Paris. I was born in Truro, Nova Scotia. I didn't live there long. I was about 4.5 years old when I moved to Cornwallis. My dad was in the Navy, and we lived in Cornwallis until about grade 6, with 1 year out for grade 4 in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Went to Dartmouth High, first went to John Martin Junior High, went to Dartmouth High, and then went to Dalhousie. And sometime mid-80s, I moved to Toronto, and that's where I live now.
So where's Cornwallis again?
Cornwallis is in the Annapolis Valley. It was a Cornwallis, what's it called? It was an Armed Forces base. Right. My dad was in the Navy, and so that's where we lived on the base.
And then you moved to Dartmouth.
Yeah, then we moved to Dartmouth. And when in Toronto, among other things, I have lots of other occupations, but I was a school teacher with the Toronto District School Board for about 22 and a half years, and I retired from that in 2019. Well, in 2015, the CBC radio actually was asking people to write something about what did Black history mean to them. And I heard this on the radio, walked into my house and sat down, and I wrote this piece called I Am Black History. And it sort of chronicles my great-greats down to my greats and my family and then myself about our experiences of being Black in Canada. And I heard from lots of people about, wow, that's my story, or that happened to me too. And so I thought maybe there's a lot of other stories to collect and to be told. And so I approached another woman, and she had a friend, and the three of us got together and started a collective called In the Black Canada. And, when we were trying to come up with the name, Black, if you look it up in the dictionary, has a lot of negative, a lot of negative connotations, I guess. And, but if you're in the black when you're doing accounting, it's a good thing, right? So we said, okay, we're going to be in the black. And then we added Canada to say we're in the Black Canada. And so we did a web series out of Toronto, interviewing Black people in Toronto about their history of coming there and what their lives were like being Black in Canada. And then we did a Windsor project, Windsor, Ontario, where we interviewed people about the many ways they came to live in Windsor. And we did that at the Windsor Art Gallery. I don't think it's called the Windsor Art Gallery anymore. It has a different name, maybe Essex County or something. But anyways, we did a video there, and they actually bought it and put it in their permanent collection. It's great. They live in YouTube, so the web chronicles, we called them, so you can look them up. And we, did an interview. I'm not sure how many people we did, but we broke it up into sections. So like talking about racial profiling, or talking about what your parents told you, different topics. Then we did a bunch of Twitter talks. Like we just started on a Wednesday night at 8:00, join us for a talk, and we just throw out a question and we'd engage with people about those various topics. And so it was great doing that. The three of us had the collective, and then after we did the Windsor project, we disbanded the collective, and I decided to go out on my own and start collecting stories across the country. So I started a new website for In the Black Canada.
And so where does the podcast come in?
Well, in 2019, my partner David and I traveled east. We came to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, Prince Edward Island, and we interviewed people. And that was in the fall of 2019. And we intended to go west in 2020. COVID happened, right? Mm-hmm. So that put a kibosh on it. So then I'm trying to think about, what am I going to do? I did all these interviews. I'd like to get that information out to people. And so I decided to start a website. So I started the website, and I would put people's photos that David takes, and I would put clips from the interviews. But then I realized I wanted more. And so I didn't know nothing about how you do a podcast, but I figured it out and taught myself how to do, interviews and how to use GarageBand and SoundCloud and all of those things, and started the podcast in January of 2021.
So those original interviews, were those video interviews or just audio interviews?
Audio. All of it is audio. Yes.
What were your intentions for those?
I just really wanted to get the stories out. I've always loved the sound of radio. I like audio, and I just wanted people to learn about Black history across this country. We've interviewed people from Newfoundland all the way to Vancouver, and have learned a lot of Black history. Learned about the Bog and Prince Edward Island. Learned about Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, learned about the Black communities in Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's just so much Black history, and I wanted to have people. I didn't want to just talk about the history and give facts. I wanted people to hear narratives, to hear stories from people. Maybe it wasn't their experience, but it was their grandparents or their great-grandparents or even their great-great-grandparents. And I really wanted people to know that Black people have been here a very long time in this country and have contributed, even though there are lots of, like in the West, in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, those communities are there mostly in name only, but they were still there and their descendants are there. Well, my ultimate goal, I really would like to have an exhibition that travels across the country. I feel cheated. I feel cheated as a kid who grew up here and went to school here that I didn't know most of this history. I mean, I lived across the bridge from the A. Murray McKay Bridge. We still call it the New Bridge. And I was living there in Dartmouth, in Wallace Heights at the time when Africville was going on, when they were tearing down those houses and kicking people out of Africville. I was probably about 14 years old. I knew nothing about that. I'm right across the bridge from it and I didn't know anything about it. And that's what I've discovered as I traveled this country, that there's lots of Black history that and lots of us don't know about. And so the goal was to have a traveling exhibit that goes across the country, stops at, universities, museums, galleries, wherever, showcasing the people who are part of this Black history. So showing David's photos, having clips from the interviews, having archival footage, perhaps having, if it's in Halifax, having local entertainments from Halifax, having local people come and do panel discussions, talking about the history of African Nova Scotians, and if it's in Quebec, same idea, having local people from there talking about the history. And that's my ultimate goal, is to do that. Or our ultimate goal, I should say, David's and mine. This was all new to us. There were 5 Black communities, 4 of them in Alberta and 1 in Saskatchewan. There's Breton, which used to be Keystone. There's Amber Valley. There's Wildwood, and there's Campsie, which is close to Barrhead. And then there's Maidstone in Saskatchewan. And these were people back in the early 1900s. The government of Canada was saying, we have all this land here. We need to get it cleared. We need homesteaders. So they were advertising for people to come up and homestead. They were advertising a lot in the United States and asking farmers to come. Of course, they weren't saying we want Black farmers, so they didn't actually think about the fact that Black farmers might apply, but they did. And these were people who had already left Texas and Virginia and Nebraska and places like that because of the racism and Jim Crow laws, and they went to Oklahoma. And then Oklahoma became a state, and the Jim Crow laws were instituted there. And so life was pretty bad for them. And some of them decided, this thing is happening in Canada. Let's go up to Canada and see what we can do. And I can't imagine, you've already started all over again. And now you're going to have to start all over again in a strange country. Some of the groups sent, scouts up early to check it out. Of course, they came in the summer to check it out and thought, this is pretty good. And they went back and convinced people to follow them.
And what year?
This was between 1905 and I think 1912, 1913. By 1913, the migration was over. And that was because Sir Wilfrid Laurier, our lovely Prime Minister, who's on our $5 bill, put together an order in council. There were a lot of people complaining to him about the number of Black people that were coming. And so he put together an order in council saying no more Black people can come. I'm paraphrasing, but...
How many did come?
About 1,500. About 1,500 came by the time the order in council. It never did pass, but letters were written and people got the message, you're not welcome here. They would do things like at the border, I think they crossed in Emerson, Manitoba, a lot of them, and other places as well, but they would be met at the border. There'd be doctors there saying, your nostrils are too wide, you're not going to be able to stand the cold. They were deemed unsuitable for the climate in Canada. First you had to have $5 a person to come. They put it up to $50 a person. They tried all kinds of things to stop people from coming. And some people couldn't. They didn't have the money. They couldn't afford it. Some people came and went back because of the harsh conditions. But by about 1912 or 13, the migration was over.
So the people who did move, whatever became of them, or any of them still living in camp?
Yes, there's descendants. There's one man, his name is Van Hayes. He's 86 years old. He lives in Keystone, which, I mean, it's Breton now, but it used to be called Keystone. He's still on the part of the original homestead that his family had. He had 9 brothers and sisters, and he's the only one who went into farming. Some of his brothers were reporters on the train and stuff like that. But he's still there on the land, and once he's gone, that's it. He's the last of the people who lived, Black people who lived in there. Because what happened, like lots of the farms weren't sustainable. It was rocky land, poor soil. It was, they were given, what was it called? Hundreds. I don't want to say that. But anyways, the land they were given was not the best always. And so as time went on, they had to go and find jobs elsewhere. So they would go into the city and get jobs on the railroad or get jobs, working as porters or whatever they could find to do. So as time went on, and, younger people were born and they didn't want to be farmers and they didn't want to be on the land. So there are, like Wildwood in Wildwood in Alberta, there's maybe 1 or 2 people still on a farm, but there's no community there at all. So
do you know maybe what was the ratio of Black farmers to white farmers that migrated, and whether or not there was preferential treatment given as to who got what land? Or
no, I'm not quite sure how the land was sorted. I met a woman in Maidstone, Charlotte Williams, and she's related to Maddie Mays, who was a midwife back then. She was one of the people who emigrated from Oklahoma, and she was a midwife in Maidstone. And so she was saying that there was Black farmers, there was Ukrainians, there was Polish. People had to help each other. And she said, oh, I know what I was going to say. Sorry. I met this woman, Charlotte Williams, and she was telling me that their land, when her great came to see it, said, I don't want this piece of land. And he went looking and found a better piece of land. But most of the time, I think you got what you were given. They paid $10 for it. And you had rules. You had to clear the land by a certain time. I think you had 3 years in which to clear the land, and you had to clear a certain amount of it, and if not, they would take the land back from you. So, and I don't know about in terms of ratio of white farmers to Blacks. I don't know, but the difference is that when the Ukrainians came, the next wave of Ukrainians came, and the next wave of Ukrainians came, or Germans or Poles. Blacks were stopped by about 1913, as I said. The migration was stopped. So.
Did you tell me the other day that you also have plans to make this a traveling exhibit, or is
yes,
this just one of many that you want to make?
This is just one of many. We have the show. We've been asked to come to Oklahoma to share the stories that we've learned about the migration to Canada, the particular stories about the Oklahoma migration. We're also going to do a show in Toronto, but that will include stories from across the country. That's the plan. Everybody that we've interviewed and we have their photo, we want to include them. We've got people from every province. We've applied for some funding to get, so that we can go to Northwest Territories in the Yukon, because David's been doing some research and discovered there's some Black history there as well. So we really want to include the entire province. We've interviewed a couple of people who grew up in Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island. We just talked about the bog, but.
To your knowledge, give me a rundown of the, the Black communities across Canada that do no longer exist. We mentioned.
Well, the bog. The bog for sure. I don't know if I have a list other than the ones in there's the ones in Alberta, as I said, Campsie, Breton, Wildwood, Amber Valley.
The ones with the Oklahoma.
With Oklahoma migration, and then Maidstone. They have in Maidstone, Saskatchewan. They have the Shiloh Baptist Church. They have the original church. Julius Caesar Lane was one of the people who brought people here, and one of his grandsons has helped. Leander Lane has helped raise funds to upkeep that church, and anybody can go in there now and visit and see the church, and the original benches are there, and they have photos of the people who came through there, and so that's there. Hogan's Alley was another Black community in Vancouver. They were building a viaduct So they decimated that community. They just kind of got rid of everybody and said, we want to build this viaduct. And the hard thing about it is that we just read this year that they're tearing that viaduct down and doing something else with it. So they, ruined a whole community for something that,
There's markers there right now?
There are. When you go to what used to be Hogan's Alley, you will see on some post, they'll list 10 different places that you can go visit. I mean, some of them are people's homes, but they'll just say, on this corner, on this street, this is where, whatever was there. And they would talk about the different organizations and businesses and stuff are there. The bog in Prince Edward Island, they now, where the bog was, is now where the, this is in Charlottetown, and this is where the, what do you call them? The legislative buildings and things like that, that's there now, where the bog was. There are no people there who were, there no longer is a bog, that area. People have figured out the streets that border it. And I think, was it 2 years ago? Or 3, I can't remember. COVID's made my mind foggy here about the dates of things, but they held Emancipation Day for the first time down there in the area around where the bog was. And I think there is a plaque there now telling people about bog and about Keisha and David Shepherd. They came with the first Lieutenant Governor of Prince Edward Island, Edmund Fanning, and he came over from Nova Scotia and brought 4 what they call indentured servants with him to Prince Edward Island, and that's Keisha and David. And the story goes that he gifted land to Keisha, and that if you see some people in Prince Edward Island who have red hair and freckles, more than likely can trace their ancestry back to David and Keisha Shepherd. Most of the Black people can trace themselves back to David and Keisha Shepherd as some of the earlier people Black people who came to Prince Edward Island. Well, we came down for Halifax because we wanted to, some people I've interviewed over Zoom. That started because of COVID, and then it just kind of continued. So I wanted to come and get their photos because we want to make sure that we have the photos of people along with their narratives, so we can include those in whatever way we're going to use them, whether it's at, as I said, at a museum or in a gallery, wherever we have an exhibition about it. And we also wanted to see if we could catch some of the things that were going on. We got to see the 40th anniversary of the Africville reunion. That was amazing to be there and meet lots of people from there. We got to be here for Emancipation Day in Halifax and meet people. And I have family here. I have my partner David laughs because everywhere we go in Canada, there's somebody I know. He keeps thinking I've got people, but I do. I have family in Kamloops and I have family in St. John's, Newfoundland. So right across the country, I have people. So we vacation and we visit and we just meet people. Often someone will say to me, well, why don't you call this person, call that person, and ask them if they're interested in being part of the project. We're going on Saturday. We're going to interview Lynn Jones in Truro on Saturday before we leave to Prince Edward Island. But yeah, I really just wanted to come to continue collecting stories. When we first came, we didn't get to Nova Scotia. We went to PEI, we went to New Brunswick, we went to Quebec. But we wanted to come back because you could spend every day for quite a long time traveling Nova Scotia and you'd meet people from different Black communities around Nova Scotia. So there's lots of stories here. So we really wanted to come and see if we could collect a few more of those. So David's not my husband. We live together. I mean, we don't live together. Sorry. He's my partner. We don't live together, but he'll say, it's not my wife. I don't know what he'll say, but we're not. Just want to correct that. Because people say, you didn't invite us to the wedding. We were not married. He's a photographer. He's been a photographer for probably about 40 years. He does a lot of street photography. His name is David Zaporozhye. David Ofori Zaporozhye, sorry. That was his father's last name, and he took that as his middle name a couple of years ago. He didn't grow up with his dad. His dad's from Ghana. But he's been a photographer. He did a lot of work around Regent Park. That's kind of where he grew up in Toronto, Regent Park, a housing development. And he's done he did about 10 years of photos from there, and he put a book together. And he just most recently published a book. Oh my God, he's going to kill me. I can't remember the name of it. But it's all about street photography. He's traveled, Paris. He's gone to Germany. He's done work kind of all over. Collecting. I like telling the story through words and he likes telling the story through pictures. So it's a good fit.
And so, are there any other upcoming projects that we didn't talk about, or anything I forgot to ask?
No, well, I can say that, as I'm learning all these stories, every time I say to David, that would make a great documentary. That would make a really good documentary. There's so many stories. And so I've decided in the spring that I'm going to go take a documentary making course, because I think, okay, well, I didn't know how to do a website, didn't know how to do a podcast, didn't know how to do all these things, and I've learned, and I'm up for learning how to make documentaries, because there's just a lot of really amazing stories, and I just want to make sure we capture them. I want children in school to know these stories. I want all people to know these stories, right? Because lots of people, we know about the Underground Railroad. People think people came up through the Underground Railroad, and that's the end of the story. And it's not the end of the story. There's lots about the Underground Railroad that we don't even know about. People don't know that Owen Sound, which is one of the most northern parts of the Underground Railway, there's lots we don't know about, and there's so many other stories, and I just want to make sure that people get that there's a lot. And as my friend Elise Harding Davis, she's from Windsor, and she said, without Black history, there is no history here in Canada. And she's the one who came up with the term, the Black Threads of the Canadian Tapestry. And I think that's a fitting title for the stories that we've been collecting.
Last question, I guess I'll ask. Are there any stories from Nova Scotia that you've told, any podcast stories that stand out the most to you? Which ones?
Well, I think the story for me about Nova Scotia is how much family I myself have that I don't know. The very first person on my podcast, his name is Leonard Paris. He's out of New Glasgow. And Chad Lucas from Lucasville had said to me, have you heard about Len Paris? He wrote a book called Jim Crow, also lived here. It's about growing up black and poor in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, outside of New Glasgow. And I said I hadn't heard of him, but I went on his website and I reached out to him and I got his book. And as I'm flipping through his book, I see, that's my Aunt Nina. I realized, turns out that my grandfather's sister was his grandmother. So we were related and didn't know it. And so it was lovely. And since then, I've met so many other people. Charles Jackson, he reached out to me. He was going to do a podcast. He was interested in doing the same kind of thing that I'm doing. And he saw the name Donna Paris and he said, let me call her up and see what she's all about. Turns out his grandfather was my grandfather's brother. So the story for me is just how much my own family history is embedded in this, bigger picture of history in Canada, Nova Scotia, and throughout the rest of Canada. So I think that's the thing that stands out the most for me. And I should tell you, because this is one of the biggest parts of the story. My grandfather was Joseph Alexander Paris, and he was part of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The battalion they just gave the apology last year. Well, my grandfather is on the Canada Post stamp. If anybody wants to look, they can see he's second from the left, and that was my grandfather. I did not know that story as a little girl. I'm not even sure if my father and his siblings knew that story, and a lot of people didn't until Senator Calvin Ruck wrote the book, Canada's Best Kept Military Secret, the No. 2 Construction Battalion. When he wrote that book and people started hearing about these stories, and then more people would say, yeah, I had a grandfather in No. 2 Construction. And so that's been great, being able to be a part of that story and to see that story come through with an apology from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. And we weren't here for that last year. We were in Edmonton collecting other stories, but it was great to see that happened. So,
when and how did you learn of your grandfather's involvement?
Well, it was through the book. My father had got the book and he passed it on to me. And then I came down, I think in 2009 might have been the first time they do a sort of a celebration every year in Pictou, and that would have been the first time that I would have come down for that. And it was great to be there and be a part of it. But yeah, I didn't know that story. And so proud to see my grandfather. When I look at the picture and I think, he's probably 17, 18 years old. I think they lied about their age to get included. And, he would have had no idea that 100 years hence he would have been celebrated on Canada Post stamp, you know.
And did you ever meet him? Do you have memories?
I knew my grandfather. He died when I was about 16 years old. He was born in Mulgrave, Nova Scotia, down in Guysborough County. And we would go there as kids to visit my grandfather and my grandmother and my father. There was 9 of them, and then my grandmother died when my father was very young, and my grandfather remarried, and they had 5 more children. And so when my father and his siblings were having their children and us, my grandfather was having a second family. So we would go down and visit them a lot. And so I did know him. I have pictures of myself with him. And I wish I'd known that story then. You know,
He never mentioned it.
he never talks about it. And this is a theme we're finding with these stories. When we interview descendants, I say, did you know about this when you were young? No, didn't know anything about it. Or a few people know. They might have diaries from a great aunt that kept track of things, but most people didn't know. And you know, when you're a kid, you're not asking those questions. When you're really young, you're just going out playing and having fun, and you're not thinking about, oh, I should ask this great aunt something, or I should ask this grandparent something. And people didn't talk about it. People out west say they were just too busy trying to keep their heads above water, you know, trying to do stuff with the land, and so they weren't really talking about what had happened to them. And I find that that's true across the country. Lots of people say, I never knew. They never talked about it.
There's a lot of narratives about, coming back to Canada and still, being second class by virtue of being black. Do you think, or do you know, or think that maybe some of the reason that they didn't talk about it was maybe a shame for having done it in the first place?
I don't think they felt shame for having gone, but they certainly felt shame. I don't know, it wasn't shame, but they weren't treated well. First of all, they applied and were told, Canada doesn't want a checkerboard army. We don't want you. And then they sent them as a construction group because, my grandfather was a sapper, dug the ditches, did the roads, did the forestry, all of that kind of stuff. They weren't treated well while they were there, and they weren't treated well when they came back. So why would you want to talk about that, right? So I think that was probably, a piece of it. They just wanted to put it away and not think about it. And I think that's not uncommon, not just for Black people, but for Indigenous people as well. The terrible things that happen. Why would you want to talk about it? People think, I don't want to visit that again. But I think what I'm finding is when people finally get a chance to talk and tell the story, it's really cathartic for them. It's really, and people like to be asked. It's funny, people don't want to talk about it, didn't want to talk about it, but they like to be asked, and they like to tell the stories now. And lots more people are digging through their ancestry and trying to find out who they came from and where they came from. And that's what started me. I really always wanted to know, where did I come from? On my mother's side, I have a great-grandfather who came from Ireland. And I always say, he didn't know me. Of course, I wasn't born when he was alive. But he was thinking about me because he was thinking about the future. And I am the future that he would have been thinking about in trying to build a better life in Nova Scotia to make things better for his family. He was thinking about me in the future. And, part of this work that I do, I hope someday my great-great-great-grands will look back and say, oh, our grandmother, she was thinking about us. She was thinking about the future by making sure that we know these stories and that this history is not lost. So that's part of why I do this as well.